everybody, welcome! I'm so excited to decorate cookies with you today. My name's Denise, owner of D is for Delicious, and these are some of my favorite cookies and colors to do and sweater weather. This time of year is so warm and cozy, so grab your sweater and let's get started. So before we actually start working on the cookies, what I'd love for you to do is get a few things out. You're gonna need a pair of scissors, some toothpicks, and some napkins. So be sure to grab those things to have on hand. It'd also be great if you had some sort of table covering to put on your table so that when you're done, you can just fold it all up and throw it away. It's so much easier than scrubbing off a table. All right, so in your box, why don't we get out a few things and set our supplies out. You have your piping bags, so you can set those aside. Don't trim them quite yet, because I'd love to show you how to do that. And your cookies, of course, you can take those out. You've got a little container with your special sprinkles. You have a practice sheet, which we're gonna be using in a moment, and some extra piping bags, just in case you need to rebag your icing. So we can set those aside and set your box aside. And what I'd love for you to do is get your practice sheet handy. Because the first thing to focus on is how to use a piping bag. So maybe you've done this with me a lot of times and you're an expert, or maybe this is the first time. I'm gonna just show all of you how important it is to practice before you jump into the real thing. So we are going to begin by trimming our bags. And I want you to just trim off a little bit to start, not too much. It's always easier to trim more. It's very time consuming to just have to rebag it and start again if you chop off too much. The icing will flow out much faster if you trim off too much. So I'd love for you to have more control by trimming off just a little bit. So use the hand that you write with. I'm right-handed. I'm gonna squeeze at the top of my bag with my right hand. And with my left hand, I'm just gonna help guide it along. I'm not going to touch the tip of my piping bag to the paper. I'm actually going to hover just above, and I'm just going to drag it along. When you stop a stream of icing, you press down and pull up. So let's try that again. You're squeezing consistently, then press down and pull up at the end of the line. If your icing is not coming out, and there's maybe breaks in the icing and the line, that means it's not trimmed enough. So go ahead and trim just a little bit more off of it. It shouldn't be coming out super duper wide. It should be coming out just enough to cover the line. And you shouldn't have to squeeze it too hard. We don't want to hurt your hand. We just want it to squeeze just a little bit to have the icing come out. So with the straight lines, you probably got the hang of that just fine. Let's move on to the lines that have a little bit more curve in them. Your hand is guiding the way, paving the way for the icing as it follows along. You're showing it where to go as you move your wrist. Press down and pull up to end it. Now I've done this a lot, so please don't worry if your lines are not completely going the way that you intended them to go. That's why we're practicing. And when you work on a cookie, it's just gonna be magical. I promise that it's gonna look so amazing in the end. You're gonna feel so proud of what you accomplish. Even if right now you feel a little bit unsteady. You are gonna get there, and I'm gonna walk you through every step of the way. So circles are always a little trickier because your hand has to go in the same motion all the way around. And they definitely are more challenging. So please just do your best with the circles. They're tricky. I've been decorating cookies for 10 years now, and circles are still the shape that I feel presents the most challenge. But challenges are good, right? and some hearts. We're not doing these shapes in our kit, but this just gives you a good starting place for how to outline and decorate. Use the icing. All right, so we can set that aside. That was just to get warmed up a little bit. So why don't you set that aside so your sleeve doesn't go in the way. All right, so get your cookies out of the bag, cut them out of those plastic cellophane bags, and let's get ready to start. We're gonna divide our decorating into 3 separate steps. So the first step is to outline our cookies. The second step is to flood them, cover them with icing. And then the third step is to detail them. That's where we put on all the cutesy special touches and complete them. So we're gonna break it into those 3 steps on each of the cookies. So with the tall latte mug, we're going to think about what colors you wanna use as we do this cookie. I did this one in white with like a little blue area around the center. You can do any color combination that you'd like. So keep that in mind as we work on cookies. Any colors you can feel free to use. I give you full creative freedom with that. And before we jump in and start decorating, I'm going to trim my bags just like I did with my practice bag. I'm trimming off just a little bit, not too much, not too small. I always try to trim away from my cookies so that little bit of plastic doesn't fall right on my cookie. All right, I'm gonna set my toothpicks a little bit closer, and I'm gonna have a napkin on my lap. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna plan out my cookies and do them the way I did in the example, just so you can use that photo that you've seen maybe on social media and at the beginning of this video for reference. So I'm going to begin with that blue band in the middle. We're doing some straight lines here. Always nice to start off with some straight lines. I made the lines on my cookie the edge, close to the edge without going over. So I went up as close as I could without going over. And I'm going to do the same with the other parts of the cookie too. I'm bringing my icing close to the edge without going over. This is like the lid area. I'm just breaking this cookie into different segments. Right. So now that I've outlined each of the segments on that cookie, I'm just going to set it aside and I'll move on. All right. And I'm going to make one little exchange here. I want to get the sweater outlined next because it's going to be one of the first ones that we flood when we get to that stage. So I'm going to do my sweater in that same bluish color I did in the example. And I'm basically following along the shape of the cookie. I left a little bit of room at the cuff so I could add some detail there later. And for the rest of the cookie, I just followed the outline, followed the shape. All right, the next one I'm going to do is that gnome. And I'm going to divide that gnome into a few different parts. He has a hat. He has a beard that covers up a lot of the cookie, and then there's a bottom to the cookie too, where it's like his little outfit. So I'm going to start with the hat area. I'm going to make that brim, I guess you would call it, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a peak. And that's like the brim of the hat. And then I'm going to continue on with the hat. And follow along the outline. All right, I left a little bit alone. I left that area at the base of his hat alone for like a little pom-pom to hang. Now comes his beard. So below his hat is his beard. So I'm just making it not really symmetrical, just a fluffy beard down there. And then for a little outfit, I don't know what gnomes wear, but his shirt, we'll do that right below. All right, and that's what I'm gonna do for the gnome right now. Now, when I work on these 3 cookies, they're a little bit farther away from my body and I don't wanna reach over. My sweater's gonna drag right through the icing. So what I'd love for you to do is just very gently shuffle your cookies around. It's always easier to work closer to you than to have to stretch out, and you won't have as much control that way either. So you want it closer to you. All right, so the fox. Let's do the orange part first on the fox. And I usually start like right above the whiskers, and I'm gonna make a point down. I'm gonna do like a V going down close to his nose and reserve this top area for the orange part of his face. And then I'm going to outline. And you know, I didn't make his one ear as pointy as I wanted to. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my toothpick. I am gonna scrape this off. That's the good thing about using toothpicks in this stage, is if you're not happy with something, you can just scrape it off and start again. This is the foundation for everything. So if you're not really happy with a line you make, now's the time to scrape it off so that you can be satisfied. Of course, they're gonna taste really good in the end, regardless of how it looks. But since you're taking the time to do this, I'm sure you want it to look nice, right? So take your time. Make your lines as close to where you want them to be as you can. All right, with the leaf, I know I did in my example orange. I felt like I did a lot of orange in my example set, but I mean, orange is such a pretty fall color. So I am going to follow along the outline of my leaf. We are trying to decide what kind of leaf this is, and I'm not sure we know the answer. But I know there's a grade in school where you study leaves, so maybe someone at home knows the answer. I wish we were together in person right now. I love hearing from kids, especially when they have answers to things I don't know. All right, and that's it for the leaf. We're gonna leave that one alone and move on to the boot. So we're gonna give the sole of the boot this like this tan color, and we're just going to give it a little area at the bottom just for that. So we're gonna outline that area, okay? And then using the boot color, I'm gonna give them this like camel colored boot, but if you want to go for a different color boot, I know they make boots in all sorts of colors, so go for whatever color scheme you'd like to do. I'm giving it a little bit of that dip at the top of it, and then just outlining the other areas. There we go, and just like that. So that is all I'm gonna do in this step. This is my outlining step, and we just completed it. So way to go, you did it. First out of 3 steps. Check that off your list. All right, so now's the time for step 2. We're going to shuffle our cookies back to that first original row up front. And then we are going to get going on some detailing. I'm sorry, not detailing. If you were listening at home, you would probably be able to tell me the second step is flooding. So we're gonna flood next. Detailing right now would not involve enough icing. We wanna cover these cookies in icing now. That's what this stage is all about. Filling in all these areas that we just planned with that color of icing. Now, some of the bags we might want to trim a little bit more so that the icing flows a little bit faster. So that's what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna trim off a little bit more. And at home, if you trimmed one of your bags on the bigger side and you know it's already trimmed rather big, maybe don't trim that one anymore. You don't need to cut it huge. You just want it to be able to come out a little bit faster. And this one I'm just using for one, so we're good. All right, we're gonna work on this cookie over here. I'm gonna start with the white, and I'm gonna choose a section. I'm squeezing pretty hard on this, and I am moving my piping bag in a circular motion to just kind of get the icing to blend with the other icing. My goal is for it to completely cover the cookie in this area and to dry nice and smooth. And so the way that can happen is by working quickly enough that it will start to settle and dry. And when I'm done touching it, it's gonna turn into like a sheet of smooth, silky icing. I'm gonna work on the lower part. And maybe you're using a different color. I'd love to see what choices you've made. You can use your toothpick to push the icing up to the outline, or you can use the tip of the bag the way I'm doing right now. I go between both of those. I don't do it just one way. So if you notice, I'm doing sections that are apart from one another. And the reason I'm doing that is just so that icing can start to dry and create like separate sections. And I'm gonna just give it a few more moments before I flood these areas. So I'm gonna just step away from this cookie for a minute and move on to the sweater. So I'm gonna flood this one. I just am so in love with this color blue. It is so pretty, and I love how it looks with orange. So we're just putting a lot of icing on. When you're covering your cookies with icing, you do not want to use it sparingly, because if you make it too thin, it will not cover the cookie underneath it completely. And you just don't want to see the cookie peeking through. You want to see a nice solid surface of icing. I am going to make this cookie all one solid color because I love the look of detailing a cookie using the same color. I think it just looks so simplistic, but also really fun. If you have something else in mind, go for it. And I'm gonna keep that blue going actually, because the gnome's hat I did in the same blue. So I'm gonna go along those areas. Gnomes have become such a thing. I don't know when or why, but I think they're so cute. I love how you can't see their little eyes. I'm using a toothpick on this one because I feel like there's more little nooks and crannies in this one. And I'm gonna move down to the beard next. I'm just trying to avoid doing two sections right by each other because I just wanna give it a little bit of drying time first, just a bit. Okay, spread that again. So if you're using a toothpick and you only have one or two, remember to wipe off your toothpick between your different colored areas. That way you don't transfer different colors to places you didn't mean to have that color. So I do that with my lap napkin as I go through. All right, I am going to leave these sections to dry and I'm gonna move these shapes around just a little bit, just a bit. All right, next, the fox face. You probably noticed in your little sprinkle cup those black sprinkles in there. Those are going to be the eyes and nose of this fox. If you so choose to use them for that, you can use them however you like, but that's what they were intended for. And we're going to add those a little bit later, even though we're getting really close to his nose area right here. We're going to add that in a little while. Okay. Orange. I know in these other areas I skipped those sections. On this fox, I really want these areas to blend together more than I want the other areas to blend. I feel like when you do the sections right beside each other right away, they almost blend as one solid surface. And I kind of want the other cookies to have a different look. So here's the fox face. I'm going to use a toothpick for this peak right here. There we go. All right, and when we leave it alone, it just will start to settle down. If you notice that there's any ripples in your icing, maybe it's still having trouble settling down, one tip I want to share with you is if you gently hold it by the edge and tap it, it helps to just settle that icing down and like tuck it in. All right, so here's the leaf. Now, if you've done a class with me before and you've done different marbling techniques, you could really have a lot of fun on this leaf, adding other colors of icing and swirling them around a little bit. And I did my example without that technique, but I think I'm going to show you in this example how you can add icing to do some marbling. That way you can see two different ways that you can go, two different routes. So first things first, I'm going to spread out the icing. All right, and then using the other colors that I have, I'm just going to add some, kind of going to outline it in the same shape, but not really trying to make my lines super impressive, because I'm going to play around with it with my toothpick in a moment. And so the marks you're making don't need to be in any particular way. Oh, I don't know if I should add the blue. I'm not going to add the blue. I'm going to add the white. And then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my toothpick and I'm just going to play around with the icing and manipulate it. Just kind of move it around. You know, when the leaves change on the trees, they never just change all the same other color. There's always a little bit of tint and hue of this and that. So that's the effect that I'm trying to do here. Just kind of play around with the icing, move the colors together in a way that it just looks like it's changing. The leaf is getting ready to fall off the tree. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to let that one sit. If you'll notice in the detail that I did before, those lines, those are all a part of the detailing phase that happens at the very end. So we'll do all of that later. Unless you love it just the way you did now, you can also just leave it like that. But who wants to be done with cookies? I love to just keep playing with them. And I hope you do too. All right, so with your boot, here's what I want to do first. I almost forgot this step. So with this boot, what I thought would be fun to do is add this little area of like sprinkles at the top to kind of give it a fluffy look. I thought that those white sprinkles in your cup would give it that effect. So we're going to do that white area first so that the sprinkles don't fall down into the other colors you're going to be putting on the boot. So let's get our sprinkles nearby. I'm gonna set out my leaf aside and I'm gonna set out those other little sprinkles. Maybe set them in the lid of your sprinkle cup so they don't roll away. And now I have access to all these little white sprinkles. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add some white to this top area. It's kind of like the fur, the fluff, whatever the material is inside Ugg boots. I don't know. But it's super warm and cozy. And so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna add some sprinkles. While the icing is wet, add those sprinkles. You can put on as much or as little as you want. But do you see how they're sprinkling onto my cookie? This is why I like to do it before the other icing is down. That way it's not going on to the other areas. If you've already flooded the rest of your cookie and sprinkles are going onto your other areas, don't worry about it. You can use your toothpick to kind of dig it out, do a little surgery, and get them out. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of brush these sprinkles aside. You could cover them up. They're awfully small, so they definitely could get buried under the icing. But I'm just gonna remove them. This one is really trapped. Okay, there we go. All right, now we can flood the rest of this cookie. So I'm gonna do this camel color. It looks like a whole lot of icing when you put it on, but you need to so that it'll dry really nice and smooth. So we're recording this video right now on such a beautiful day when it is not sweater weather, but I believe tomorrow is going to be sweater weather again. I think it's supposed to cool off quite a bit. So maybe you're inside on a cold day decorating cookies, staying really cozy. All right, I'm going to fill in the sole of the boot. And now I'm going to shuffle those around again. I'm going to get these cookies back so I can keep working on these. All right. Okay, so on this cup, in the background of this middle area, the like koozie part or whatever you call it, I'm gonna do some polka dots on there. And in my example, you'll notice that the polka dots are just one solid surface with the icing. And the way you can achieve that is to drop icing down into wet icing. And it just turns it into one solid surface. So, I'm gonna start flooding. And I'm gonna think of what color I'd like to use. I'm gonna go with that orange again because I think these two colors look so fun together. All right, spread it out. And I'm going to do the polka dots while the icing is wet. That way it's a background pattern. And then in the detailing step, I will put that sprinkle on top, that leaf sprinkle, just to give it a little extra something. All right, so I've just done all my flooding. I made sure it was pushed up into the edge. And now I'm going to add some polka dots. So I push down and pull up. It's kind of like how you stopped a line when you were doing your outlining on the practice sheet. To stop a polka dot, you press down and pull up. That way it won't trail off and follow your hand. All right, and that's just going to dry as one solid surface. And so then I'm gonna get to that last little white area. Fill that in. Giving that little bit of time to dry in between, I think it helps it to just give it more of like separate areas. Maybe it would have looked the same. I don't know. I know on the fox, I see that it's like closer to being one solid surface. And here there's a little bit of separation, the way a lid would be. So if you did it all at once, don't worry. I go back and forth with how I do things. I really do. All right, let's move on to the gnome, that last little bit of hat, and then his shirt. On the gnome's hat, you know, you could do some marbling on the gnome if you're still just in the beginning steps of flooding this hat. But while we're talking about marbling, if you wanted to do something in the part that we already flooded a while back, it's important not to play around with that now. Only when the icing is wet is it possible for you to manipulate the icing and move it around so that it dries as one solid surface. I'm just gonna leave it just that color. I think it looks nice. So let's get his little shirt filled in. And with the beard and the way I made the different ripples in the beard, I'm going to use a toothpick to move it into those areas, I think. No? I feel like this might actually be better. It almost rounds off the area a little bit easier using the tip of my piping bag. All right, so you guys, you just did step 2. You are done with the flooding. Good job. All right, so it would be great if you wanted to take like a snack break, go do a little chore or something you need to get done so we can give this a little bit of drying time. Ideally, it'd be awesome if we could step away from our cookies for about 15 minutes to let them get to like a matte colored finish so that it goes from glossy to about matte. It means it's drying. So why don't we do that, step away for just a little bit, give them some drying time, and then we'll come back to detailing. All right, so we gave our cookies a little bit of drying time. While we let them dry just a few more moments longer, let's rebag some of our colors. So in the extra bags that I gave you, get them opened up a little bit, and we're going to rebag a few colors. We're going to rebag the colors that we want to do fine details with. So first of all, did you trim any of your bags so big that you might need to transfer that into a new bag and trim the bag smaller? I know that I would like to do that with my blue because I want to give it a thinner tip because I want to do all of the details on the sweater. And with these little bags, you can either tie a knot, which is tricky because they're little, or you can use like a hair tie or rubber band or something. And then the other color that I want to rebag is my caramel color. So what you do is you trim off a big chunk off to the side, and then you put it down into the new bag and just squeeze the icing out. And now we have a fresh start. I chose those two colors for the sweater and for the boot. I'm going to be making some lines on the boot that I need a finer tip for, and on the sweater as well. Okay, so let's do some finishing touches. So this is the detailing phase, and I'm kind of gonna work on some things at a different pace right now. So something I need to do on the boot first has to dry just a little bit before the next step. So I'm gonna shuffle that closer to me right now. So on the boot, I want to do my, some of the detailing, like the ridges on the boot. There are some different areas where there's seams. And so I'm gonna make those areas now. I'm gonna make one near the heel area, and then one near the top of the boot. And then there's a seam that will be going down the center of the boot. So I wanna bring those seams to life. And I wanna give that just a few moments to dry before I do some of the other steps. So I'm gonna come back to this one. All right, so on the big latte cup, this is where I am going to glue on that little leaf, which actually really matches that leaf nicely. That was totally accidental, by the way. I wish I could say we planned that, but it just worked out. So I'm gonna put a little icing on the back of the leaf, just a bit. I'm just gonna drop it down, not gonna push too hard because I don't wanna dent it, but if you just tap it on there, it will stay put. And just for fun, I'm not gonna cut my glue bag yet. I was gonna say I'm gonna outline that middle area. I think I might just outline it orange. There are orange polka dots in that area. I just wanna make this middle area stand out. And so I'm highlighting it by just going along the edge. It adds more pop of color and it makes it stand out a little bit. Just like that. You can also go along the white areas if you'd like to make those areas stand out. I do this a lot when I don't want to be done with a cookie. In all honesty, that's why I'm doing this. I just think it gives it a finishing touch, but also it's a little bit hard for me when I do classes to be like, and we're done with this one. In some of my areas, the line didn't go smoothly enough, so I just went over those one more time. I noticed it got thinner in that one area. And at the bottom too. And one at the very top, the lid. It's kind of like we're highlighting. We're going over each area just once more. I think, friends, we're done with that one now. I'm gonna be done with that and I'm gonna set it aside. I'm actually gonna shuffle my fox closer and finish detailing the fox. So on the fox, there's a few steps here. On the ears, I like to just call some extra attention to the ears by doing an upside down V. And then on the eyes, bring those eyes closer to you. And then on the eyes, I'm just gonna add a little bit of the same orange color to help glue it on there. Actually, we're gonna put it right down near that seam. Fox's eyes are spaced pretty far apart, although you can place them wherever you like. Oops. And then we're going to do one for the nose. I put a little too much on the last one, so now I just added a little drop. And there is the fox. So we're done with those two cookies. It's all just like concluding now, the conclusion. All right, the leaf. Why don't we do some veins on the leaf here? So on the leaf, I start at the top. You can choose any color you want. I'm choosing this tan. Make a line down the center, and then you can just make some veins. They're basically like big spread out V's. And there's our leaf. All right, so the sweater. I have a lot of fun on this sweater. This is one I could play with a lot because there's so much just detailing you can do And sweaters like the cable knit, you know, that knit look, the way to achieve that is a lot of little marks. And so I'm gonna trim this one really small. Smaller than I have trimmed any of the other bags up to this point. I wanna make sure it comes out though. So I'm squeezing it off to the side to make sure it comes out and it's not like starting and stopping. That's too small. Okay, so I'm gonna divide this sweater into some areas. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the neck and I'm going to go down to like where the sleeve would be. I'm gonna make an area there. I'm going to make an area there. So this is gonna be like the body in the middle, the body of the sweater. I'm gonna make some more lines coming down. It doesn't really matter how many, because you can fill them in however many you make. I'm making areas to then create a little pattern in between. So it looks like I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas as it turns out. Okay, now I'm gonna start in that middle area, the very center, and I'm gonna make a series of V's. They're almost like hearts, they're V's. I go over it 2 or 3 times to make it a little bit taller. If you go over it just once, it will be super thin. So depending on how many layers of icing you put on it, the more like pronounced it will be. Yeah, I'm going over it more than 2 or 3 times. I think that was more like 5. I'm not counting, but I'm going over it quite a bit. So I'm just making a repetitive pattern. The V is getting larger as I go down because I have more room as I go down. Okay, now in these areas beside, what I forgot to do is so I'm making like a tiny little column, and what it's going to do is it's going to serve as an area to just be left alone. So it's like a parallel line that I'm adding down beside both, aside from the V's I just did. Now I'm getting way too like intricate and fancy. This is just one of those cookies that you can go whichever route you want. You can do it super simple, or you can take this time and make it a little bit extra. So in this area, I'm gonna make a series of X's going down. And I'm connecting the top of each new X with the bottom of the X that was before it. I don't knit. I don't know if this is a real term for a stitch or something. But in cookie terms, I'm just making X's. This is making me think of that yarn I've seen in stores. My gosh, it's like the hugest yarn. Have you guys seen that? Where it's like the thickest, softest yarn. It looks like it would make the coziest blanket ever. I'm gonna do that same pattern now on the other side. A bunch of X's. Doesn't the same color on top of the same color just look so pretty and simple? Love it. All right, so I kind of mirrored on both sides the same pattern, and now I'm gonna go back and do that same center pattern, that series of like V's or hearts or whatever you're gonna call it. I'm gonna do those off on these side columns. You can pack them in really close together. You can space them out. I'm spacing these out just a little bit more. And for the other side. I notice my tip is just getting a little bit clogged here, so I'm pushing off to the side, just squeezing off that icing so that I have good control. I wish I could peek through and see everybody's work right now. I miss in classes this time when I could walk around and look at how everyone was doing. I really miss seeing your work. So now on the sleeves, I'm creating some of those areas the way that I did in the center of the sweater. I'm just creating some different columns. I think I'm just going to make 3 areas in this one. As you can see, you can get as detailed or you can be as simple as you want with your detailing. So the patterns that I'm using are X's and hearts. I'm sure there are squiggles you could do, like a long line of squiggles would look super cute. I think I might try that in one of these columns. But these only work with a fine tip. If my tip were super wide, this would all just be bleeding together and be one blob. So that's why we like to rebag our icing every once in a while when we're detailing, just so we have more control and like a fine tip. And now on this one, I'm just gonna do a squiggle. I know, it's more like a zigzag at the top. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Squiggle, and then hearts, or V's. And the last series of X's. If you guys have made it through this far on this cookie, I think you are troopers. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to decorate this one. There's so much detail. And then on the little sleeves, I'm just adding a little extra cuff there, just a little back and forth, just so it looks like a separate section. So there is your sweater. You guys did it. That was a lot. Thanks for following along. Okay, the Ugg boot. We're gonna make one more seam down the center of like a furry area. Just peeking out. And then outside of that, did I trim this yet? Yep. Okay, outside of that, I'm gonna make these areas for the like button fasteners, or fasteners I should say. I'm gonna make this little crooked line in the back, and then I'm going to make a V extending from that. And then I'm gonna put a tiny little button in that front area with that tan. Okay, and while we have this tan in our hand, very carefully, move your little gnome closer to you. I'm gonna use this as the color for his nose. That's just peeking out right at the very top. That's all that's showing on him. I am also going to outline or highlight his beard once more, just to give it a little bit more attention. And I'm also going to give him a little pom-pom on his hat. And there is your little gnome. All right, you guys, so you did it. Your cookies are done. I hope you love them. And I want to give you just a few tips on storing them. So in my opinion, cookies taste best after they've dried overnight, when the icing has had a chance to set. So what'd be great is if you could load these cookies back into the box they came in to let them hang out overnight and let them finish drying. Of course, you're probably gonna wanna taste one. Realistically, you're gonna wanna have one today. Totally cool. The others can just hang out in the box all night. Do not stack them on top of each other. They need drying time before you can stack them and put them on a platter or a plate, or even put them in a Ziploc bag. You don't wanna put them in a bag or stack them right now. You wanna let them just hang out in a box overnight. And then if you have not eaten them after 2 or 3 days in the box, if you'd like to store them overnight, go ahead and put them in an airtight container, something that has a lid, and you can pop that in the freezer. And if you stack them on top of each other, just make sure that parchment paper is between the layers so that the icing won't stick. Well, I sure had fun and hope that you did too. I hope that you'll come back with us next time as we do Thanksgiving cookies. So thanks for joining us. I hope you had fun. Please tag us on social media to share your pictures or email them to me. We'd love to see your work and your creations. Thanks for joining us. Bye.